things to know. For and since. For is used to say how long a state, an action, or a situation continues. For example, I have been studying for 2 hours. For is followed by the duration, which means the period of continuity. On the other hand, since means from a particular time or event in the past. For example, I have been studying since 2 o'clock and I haven't seen him since his sister's wedding. Since is followed by the start point of an action or state. In other words, for is followed by a length of time, which means a period of time. On the other hand, since is followed by a particular time, as the following. With years, for is used with a period of a year or years. For example, for a year, for 2 years, for a few years, and for the year. The year means this year or the present year. On the other hand, since is used with a certain year. For example, since 1999. With months, for is used with a period of a month or months. For example, for a month, for 2 months, for a few months, and for the month. On the other hand, since is followed by a certain month. For example, since May, which means since last May. With weeks, for is used with a period of a week or weeks. For example, for a week, for 2 weeks, for a few weeks, and for the week. On the other hand, since is followed by a certain week. For example, since the last week of May. With days, for is used with a period of a day or days. For example, for a day, for 2 days, for a few days, and for the day. On the other hand, since is used with a certain day. For example, since Sunday, which means since last Sunday. With time, for is used with a period of time. For example, for an hour, for 2 hours, for a few hours, and for the hour. On the other hand, since is used with a certain time. For example, since 2 o'clock. With last and the last. For is followed by the last, which is followed by a period of time. For example, for the last week, for the last year, for the last month, etc. On the other hand, since is used with last or the last as the following. Since is followed by last, which is followed by a period of time. For example, since last week, since last year, since last month, etc. Since is followed by the last, which is followed by a period of time, followed by of. For example, since the last week of July. Since is followed by the last, which is followed by a noun referring to an action or event, not a period of time. For example, since the last meeting, since the last holiday, since the last lesson, since the last match, etc. Now, remember and compare. Since last week, for the last week, since the last week of July, since the last meeting. Wherever for is used before ever. Forever means all the time. For example, she said she would love him forever. On the other hand, since is used after ever. Ever since means continuously since the time mentioned. For example, He was bitten by a spider once, and he has been afraid of them ever since. Important note: if ever since is followed by a sentence, it is followed by a sentence in the past simple. For example, we have been friends ever since we were at school together. With long, for is used before long. For long means for a long time, usually in questions and negatives. For example, have you been studying here for long? And I haven't talked to her for long. On the other hand, since is used after long. Long since means if something has long since happened, it happened a long time ago. For example, I've long since stopped talking to her. With a sentence, for is followed by as long as or so long as plus a present or a past simple sentence. For example, I have been fascinated by sports for as long as I am a student. In this example, as long as is followed by the present simple because the sentence before it is in the present perfect. I had been fascinated by sports for as long as I was a student. In this example, as long as is followed by the past simple because the sentence before it is in the past perfect. On the other hand, since is followed by a past simple sentence. For example, I have or I had been fascinated by sports since I was a student. Since is followed by the past simple if the sentence before it is in the present perfect or in the past perfect. A confusing use of can remember and could remember with since and ever since. We have just studied that since and ever since are always followed by the past simple, but with remember they can be followed by the present simple. Why? This is because the verb remember itself refers to recalling something from the past to your mind. So, can remember expresses the start point of the action in the past. For this reason, since and ever since can be followed by can remember or could remember as the following. I have been fascinated by sports since or ever since I can remember. In this example, since and ever since are followed by I can remember, which is a sentence in the present simple, because the sentence before them is in the present perfect. The other example, I had been fascinated by sports since or ever since I could remember. In this example, since and ever since are followed by could remember, because the sentence before them is in the past perfect. So, since and ever since can be followed by can remember or could remember according to the sentence before them.